Mindfulness is a way of unhooking and inhabiting a less constrained perspective. The thought becomes a world that we inhabit. The world's ability to take my attention is stronger than my ability to hold on to it. Be kind and let go.
What is mindfulness?
It can be defined in a bunch of different ways. And I think that there are a ton of competing definitions. Why don't I give one of the many and see how it lands? Mindfulness comes from Buddhism originally. Now it's become, this sort of more clinically studied thing, but it dates back to the Buddha. That's where this stuff all comes from. And the Buddha did not do us a favor of actually defining mindfulness. He used the term all the time, but he never gave a definition of it. So people have been trying to work it out. One way to think about it is paying attention to experience in a particular type of way, which is that rather than trying to change our experiences in order to make them better, change our thoughts, change our emotions, change our environment, we simply observe all of that stuff exactly as it is without any attempt to change it. And the paradoxical thing about that is that when you do that, when you observe your experience without trying to change it, what you'll often find is that it changes in a positive way. And that's sort of the magic of mindfulness.
Why do we need mindfulness?
I think we spend a lot of our time hooked in our experience. A thought comes up and we're pulled into it. Right? A thought becomes a world that we inhabit, right? A reality. It can be very helpful to unhook and to experience phenomena as phenomena, arising and passing, rather than things that pull us in, hook us, become our context, shape our thinking, become the lens through which we view everything. That's one perspective, and it's a useful perspective. We need to be able to analyze, engage, think things through, inhabit the past, inhabit the future so we can reflect. But if we're doing that compulsively, that constrains our perspective in a lot of ways. And so mindfulness is a way of unhooking and inhabiting a less constrained perspective.
When did you start thinking about the problem of lack of presence or defining mindfulness in your life in this way?
By the way, I'm so completely unsatisfied with how I answered those questions. We're not going to double back or anything, but it's just, there's such big questions. There's so many ways to answer it. I'd rather write an essay on it than give a spontaneous answer. But oh well.
I think part of it, though, to that point is it's really a difficult concept to encapsulate into one word. If the Buddha couldn't even define it or wouldn't define it more accurately, did not define it, then for the rest of us to go and aim to define it, I mean, for me, from my perspective, mindfulness has been about raising awareness in my life, cultivating presence in my life, and aiming to maintain those pillars at a high level and do them actionably. And it's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the mistake was in trying to give a definition of mindfulness. There's so many ways to slice it. There's so many lenses through which to look at it, and each one of them is illuminating. There's the lens of being hooked versus not being hooked, which is what I just provided. There's the idea of trying to change things versus observing them as they are, which is what I said before that. There's the idea of attention and focus that is stable rather than scattered and juddering all over the place and bouncing between the past and the future. And that's an important component of it. And what mindfulness is, there's the idea of being kind to yourself, to your own experience, which is an important dimension of it. And mindfulness sits at the intersection of all of these things, right? You have to sort of come at it from all those directions, and then you start to see the vague shape of the thing that we're calling mindfulness. But it's just, in all those ways, it's such a wholesome way of being in the world. It brings that presence. It brings clarity of mind. It brings stability of focus. And it brings a relationship to your experience. your thoughts, your emotions, and the things happening in your life, right? Your trials and tribulations and conflicts and whatever. It brings a relationship to all those things that is non-adversarial, right? And it turns out that being adversarial to your own experience is basically just a recipe for suffering and not a recipe for skillful functioning in the world either. And so when you bring this kind, calm, present, unhooked, non-judgmental mode to your life, the outward things in your life and your inner world, you suffer less, you function better, more skillfully, more thoughtfully, and I think you are better to the people in your life, right? You're a kinder person. So there's a second pass at answering those questions.
I love it because it sounds like a lot of mindfulness involves self-compassion and that ability to develop a healthy relationship with yourself, which requires doing the inner work. How have you worked on yourself and how have you done the inner work?
Well, so this whole journey or whatever started for me in law school, where I was very stressed. I have ADHD. I was in a very competitive law school environment, and there was this feeling that everyone around me was so organized, so focused. I didn't feel like I had those skills at all. So I kind of felt behind, like I was just trying to keep my head above water. And I had heard that meditation can help with focus, it can help with stress levels. So for very pragmatic, functional reasons, I got interested in meditation. And so I began practicing meditation the summer after my second year of law school. And then I got pretty deeply into it pretty quickly. I met my main teacher at the time, who was a Tibetan Lama, did my first silent retreat with him. And then as the years passed, I kept with it all through law school, through my clerkship, and through beginning to practice law. I was studying with different teachers, trying to practice every day, reading a lot, and going on sort of ever longer silent retreats from 1 week to 2 weeks to a month to a 7-month retreat that I did in 2014, which was really a turning point for me.
What is a silent retreat before we get into all the benefits?
Yeah, so basically you just don't do anything but meditate and wash yourself and eat. You basically maintain your existence and meditate, and that's kind of all you do. So oftentimes there are teachers. Ideally, there are teachers present to help give you guidance, advice. They might give talks once in a while, but you're not, other than the short opportunities to have an interview with the teacher and ask them questions, you're not speaking. You're generally not reading or writing, certainly not using the internet. And so you're sort of just free from all narrative, verbal type stuff. And you just focus on cultivating your meditative practice and your mindfulness practice continuously throughout the day.
Did you have this relationship with meditation or this curiosity around meditation before law school at all? Or it was really once you kind of got into the swing of things that you started leveraging it?
I think I had sort of the vague spiritual malaise of like a privileged person with nothing real to worry about. You know what I mean? Like I think it's like, oh, surely there's more to life than all of this. That sort of adolescent ennui. But it was sort of inchoate and undirected and unfocused. So there was like a vague sort of inclination in that direction. And then I think that when law school really put the pressure on me, maybe that's why meditation is the direction I looked in, right? There are probably a bunch of things I could have done. I could have learned productivity techniques. But for some reason, the direction I went was, maybe I should get into meditation. So I think there was some pre-existing resonance there.
You talked about the relationship between your focus, your meditation, your attention, ADHD. How did meditation help you hone your ADHD, if you will?
I still have ADHD for sure. It's like, I think pretty important to make clear that it is not an ADHD cure. ADHD isn't like really a thing. It's woven too deep into the fabric of who I am to even think about it as a thing that I could cure, right? Or would even want
to cure, for sure.
That being said, it is useful in a variety of ways. I think, does it help me focus a bit better? Yes, it does. But I'll just be completely candid and completely realistic. As my ability to stabilize my attention has increased, so has the world's ability to hijack my attention, right? I started meditating in 2006. Obviously, the technology of disrupting my attention has gotten better year after year. So I would say that the world's ability to take my attention is stronger than my ability to hold on to it, regardless of all the practice that I've done. And I've done a hell of a lot of practice. So in that regard, it's helpful, but of limited help. You still need other techniques. You need to figure out how to work with your devices in skillful ways. Meditation alone, at least for me, does not solve that. One area where it's really helped with my ADHD is that, I've always, especially as a kid, but even as an adult, impulsive. I didn't have a great verbal filter. I would say things before I thought about it. And that has improved a lot because of just the little bit of space between stimulus and response that meditation creates and expands, and mindfulness creates and expands. So now there really is a feeling before an impulse to say something arises, I perceive the impulse mindfully, and then it almost feels like I have a little bit more time, a little bit more space to decide, hey, is that a skillful thing to say or not? That has been powerful in my personal life, of course, because I don't upset the people I love, and in my work as a lawyer too, is really useful. If opposing counsel says something ridiculous and there's a thing you could say back that would escalate things and a thing that you could say back that would best serve your client's goals, it's really useful to have that little bit of extra space to choose, right, your response instead of just reacting. And that's useful for anyone, but especially for folks with ADHD where that verbal filter might be a little bit compromised. I found the mindfulness practice to be invaluable.
You mentioned a competitive environment before in law school. You're like lightly brushing over a Harvard law education. And I think that humility speaks volumes of the character. And
I'm a great guy. I'm glad that you picked that up. Thank you for noticing that.
No, we've gone back and forth. I wouldn't be here otherwise, and or you wouldn't be here otherwise. I'd be here.
Yeah, fair enough.
I grew up with similar conditions, I guess we'll call them, in terms of having been labeled with ADHD as a quote unquote problem.
Yeah.
And I would tell myself this story around, I got reading comprehension issues, I got critical thinking issues, and really it was when I think about it now, I think part of it, to your point about impulse, was an undisciplined approach and a unfocused approach, a lack of presence, a lack of desire in many ways to really want to immerse myself in what was in front of me. I was more concerned with my sociability. I was more concerned with fitting in, and those things kind of took priority over any kind of schoolwork or anything like that. So I got in my own way, kind of sabotaged myself in that way. But through my military experience, developing some impulse control, some discipline, some good routines and habits, picking up fitness, I have tried to meditate. I've had good experiences with it. I haven't had
I want to hear about this now. Okay, I want to hear about this. Yeah, let's go.
In COVID, it also was something that I'd picked up because I felt like if we're gonna be locked up or put in those or told not to leave our apartments, I was living in New York at the time, and I didn't leave, and I was working at the Bronx DA's office at the time too. So I remember walking out of my apartment at one point, seeing like a kid on a scooter with a mask on, and it was just so like eerie around these streets. So I needed things to help me kind of calm myself. And thankfully, for a birthday gift, asked my parents a couple months before COVID for adjustable dumbbells that go up to 70s. And I got in some of the best shape of my life, or I got in the best shape of my life. And
mine only go up to 50. All right,
70s, big difference.
You win.
Don't worry, bro. Now they go up to 80s. I got a new set. So I digress. So I would train, I would meditate. And when I first started to discover the benefits of it, ironically, now I'm wearing a Whoop and I would track the meditation, I noticed my heart rate would go lower.
Sure.
And I never associated the two. So I saw the real-time data reflecting decreases in my resting heart rate. And that would give me proof of concept. So I would make an intentional effort to meditate for 10, 15 minutes. And I would do it either guided or I'd practice on my own. Sometimes it'd turn into breath work, specifically nasal breathing. And I was going through this phase where I'm studying Stoicism, I'm learning about mindfulness, I'm working at the DA's office, I'm practicing meditation, I'm physically changing my body. I was healing an injury through concept called, or a practice called postural restoration. I had disc protrusions in my back. So like all of this is kind of between tracking the data, working with people that suffer from trauma, reading the concepts of philosophy that were helping me grasp at a wider perspective, like, and raising my awareness around the world. It was impacting and influencing my experience. So I felt like meditation, I mean, the Stoics meditated, right? So that was also influencing me.
Did they?
I think Ryan Holiday talks about it. So what I was reading there was some harmony there.
I know that Seneca practiced something called premeditatio malorum, which has the word in there, which means premeditation on evils. That's the practice where you imagine all the things that could go wrong, right? I could be turned out in the street, I could be homeless, and you do that to prepare yourself for it as well as to recognize how lucky you are to be in the situation that you're in. Yeah, so that's a meditative, certainly a contemplative practice. Yeah, and Stoicism and Buddhism, the overlaps are super interesting. I don't want to get off on a tangent about this, but I don't know if there's actually a historical connection there. I know that there was a Hellenistic, Buddhistic, there was an interchange of ideas there. That the Greeks and the Buddhists did have contact, but I don't know. Anyway, that's a different podcast.
That's good to know. Yeah, to your point, a different pod. But the point that I'm making is, I slowly got my attention under my control, and that helped me pay more attention to the things that were within my control, and that allowed me to put my attention and effort into areas that I could control and make strides and strive to want to be bigger and better and badder, So
bigger and better and badder
every day, man. So I think I stopped because I didn't have that same level of commitment and passion around it, but I'm always curious about it. And it's funny because I know you have a group of people that you work with called the Sit Heads, or a group that you've curated. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I love Sit Heads. So it's called Sit Heads Meditation Club. And this has nothing to do with my work in the law, except that every now and then some lawyer will, knowing about me through my work, will find their way to Sit Heads, which is always very fun and welcome. So Sit Heads is it's a sitting and social group for people interested or curious about deep meditation practice. Anyone who's interested on like, hey, what's on the other side of headspace? What's on the other side of calm? Once you've dipped your toe and you recognize something of value there for you, or something that speaks to you about it, and you want to go further. Anyone with that sort of interest or aspiration or curiosity, regardless of experience level, Sit Heads is a place for them. I like to call it a serious meditation group for non-serious people. So we don't take ourselves very seriously. We like to have fun. We like to hang out. We'll do things where we'll meditate for an hour and then we'll all go get tacos from the taco truck and just sort of vibe and chat. A lot about practice, but not always, and just eat our tacos or whatever. We do a thing called Shut Up and Eat, which is a mindful, partly silent dinner party where we'll get together. It's potluck, And then it's mostly just a chill dinner party, music, talking, whatever. But then there'll be periods where we'll ring a bell and we'll eat in mindful silence, just to experience the sort of contemplative dimension of eating. So it's kind of mixing an interest in deep meditation with just sort of hanging out and socializing and trying to figure out what it looks like to be a person who wants to practice deeply and transform themselves through practice in a place like New York at a time like 2026, right? What does that look like? And I feel like the people I look at as my forebears, my sort of like meditation ancestors, the folks who came before me, helping build the infrastructure for meditation in the West. So folks like Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield, they're all Jews, actually, most of them. But I feel like those folks did such an amazing job of building the retreat infrastructure. They basically built retreat centers, mostly. That's not all they did. They wrote amazing books. They're really responsible for so much of the promulgation of meditation in the West. Not solely, but they were very involved. But I feel like there's this amazing retreat infrastructure, but there isn't an infrastructure that I think is really where it needs to be for people to maintain and develop their practice in their daily life in a deep way. And so Sit Heads is an attempt to contribute to figuring out what that infrastructure looks like. And we're just sort of experimenting together.
At what was the tipping point where you realized that you can teach well-being, mindfulness, train professionals on these topics? At this point in your career, you've trained thousands of attorneys at the highest levels, professionals across all disciplines at the highest levels. What was the tipping point that you realized you are a messenger of a wider purpose?
So one thing I want to be clear about is that when it comes to Sit Heads, I'm not the teacher. I'm not any sort of, I have no like spiritual or pedagogical authority in Sit Heads. I'm just the guy who sends the emails. I'm the guy who hosts the events. In my work, I do share, I do teach. But I still feel iffy about it, to be honest. There was never a time where I was like, yes, I am a teacher. When I even first considered the idea, I talked to a bunch of my own teachers first because I was like, is this okay? I'm a relatively experienced meditator, but compared to my teachers, no, right? Like my teachers have been teaching for decades, practicing for many more decades than me. They've done, the teachers I look up to have done years and years and years worth of retreat. These are deep, deep, profoundly accomplished practitioners. And I see myself as really just on the, still in the very beginnings of my practice, even 20 years in. And so I don't know if I even feel that way now, right? I just sort of do it. I've been reassured by my teachers that I'm doing a good thing. And I feel that I'm doing a good thing as long as I also stay in my lane. So I know what's appropriate for me to teach and what I'm capable of sharing and what wouldn't be appropriate. And I make sure to stay there, right? So like one thing I don't do is I don't lead retreats. If I were to ever do a retreat, it would either need to be short, very limited in its scope, or I would need another teacher there that I look up to really be the teacher. That's kind of the answer, is like I'm still always questioning myself about that.
Do you feel that is more of an imposter syndrome? Is it more of a humility? Is it more of a respect for the practice to say that you are not at a certain tier that maybe your teachers are or your mentors are, and therefore you're on this constant journey aiming towards that? Because from my perspective, someone with your type of education experience and commitment to a mission, I think that there is a obligation to share certain insight that only comes from lived experience and commitment to a practice like you've done over 2 decades, and the real-time benefits that people have experienced from working with you as well. that's led you to go on to start Flourish, where now you have a team of psychotherapists, nutritionists, and more that you lead. So help me understand that balance.
First of all, thank you for shouting out Flourish. That's Flourish Legal Wellbeing, teamflourish.com. I think it is a respect thing. It's partly like a respect thing, respect for the teachings, respect for my teachers. It's maybe there's some imposter syndrome mixed in there, but I also think it's like, in some ways, it's I think a healthy precaution. I think it is much better to always be questioning, hey, is this appropriate? Am I within the sphere of capacity? I'd rather err on the side of questioning than go the other way and be like, no, I'm here to share my path, my way. I'm here to give the word. Like, I see it go in the other direction, and it always ends in tears, And so if I had to pick, that's what I'd pick. I think it's it's not that I doubt that I'm benefiting people. I do feel that what I do helps. And I feel that within my sphere of I don't want to be like I think false humility is not helpful either. I think that within my sphere of capacity, I am capable. I am good, I think, at introducing. I think I have an ability to share the basics of these techniques in a way that resonates with especially professionals, especially people who maybe don't have as much of the spiritual inclination, but are interested in how these things can enrich their lives and well-being, and come at it more through that lens, that sort of grounded, everyday lens. I think I'm good at that. I do think I'm good at that. I think I have a way of explaining these practices with some clarity and precision. So I want to give myself credit for that. But I do think it's really important to always be asking, what's appropriate? What can I do? Where are my limits?
And I think a big part of that perspective resonates with me because I used to have those same reservations about whether I was worthy of being able to communicate things that I geek out on, for lack of a better way of putting it. And for me, that tipping point was a impulse that I wanted to share these ideas because I felt like they could benefit people more than myself. And I rationalized it as a guide, as a coach, and not as and even before I get up on stage and speak, I do get spiritual about it. And I'm like, God, speak through me to whoever needs to hear it, because I don't know if I have the words and I want to serve the audience.
That's
and it
beautiful.
also used to impact thank you. It also used to impact my ability to deliver when I would stand up in court. I would make it about me instead of making it about the case or making it about the people of Bronx County. And when I learned how to serve the audience, even when I would get up and speak, I would make it about me. I would make it about how can I help the audience. And when I flipped the script and started to really prioritize the audience and serving them, not as, oh, this is what I have to say and you should listen, because it was more, I hope this is what you need to hear because I needed to hear it at some point, and I hope it benefits you in the same way.
I think that's great. I mean, I think it's really important when you're doing any sort of teaching or supporting profession or caregiving profession, which is a little different, but it's easy. I think it's easy when your job involves getting on stage in front of a bunch of people to make it about, hey, how did I do? Did I nail that? And it really helps. It'll make your performance better too if you just really make it about how can I serve.
It's been a massive transformative lens for me to use, and I've been doing it for a few years, and I think it's really helped me. I mean, there's obviously still moments when you get survey feedback that's like, oh, that didn't work, or oh, wow, that worked better than I ever thought.
I never get survey feedback like
I'm
that.
always looking, man. I'm always looking. I audit like every good, bad, and different, but I digress. I want to talk about the actionable things people can do, and I don't want to lose sight of that in the time that we have together. I think a big part of what people, in my experience, have questioned the competence and the impact of working on yourself or working on oneself, or the idea of well-being as a whole is something intangible and it's wishy-washy or cliche and they can't relate to it, or too cool for school kind of mentality, when in reality a lot of attorneys, and specifically the data would reflect, and I'm quite positive you already know, over 50% of attorneys across all age groups report some form of burnout. How can we start to productively navigate burnout as a profession?
I feel like the resistance has gone down a lot. My experience is that when I am talking to a room full of lawyers, they're quite open because they know that they're suffering. So, and that's been my experience for a while, is that, oftentimes when I talk with law firms about, or other organizations about coming in to talk to their people, they'll be like, are people going to take this seriously? Are they going to roll their eyes at that? It's like, in my experience, they don't roll their eyes. First of all, I work really hard on making sure our programs are delivered and framed and positioned in a way that preempts the eye roll. So we don't get a lot of that sort of skepticism or eye rolls, or we diffuse it quickly. But there's not a lot of skepticism to begin with, to be honest, because a lot of lawyers are burned out, stressed out, overwhelmed. And so they're like, hey, what have you got? Do you have something for me? Like, tell me about it. So I have not found them to be closed in that way. People are hungry for it. And I think that now I just feel like people are more stressed and overwhelmed by the day. I feel like there's especially in the professional world, the professional sphere, there's this undertone of anxiety and fear. I'm going to be replaced by AI. There's the world is changing under our feet and we feel it. It's like there's a rumbling, something's starting, and we don't know what's going to happen. It feels like February of 2020, like something's about to erupt. I think people are acutely aware of the need to take care of their own well-being. I find that I have to make that pitch a lot less than I used to.
Hi everyone, welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode.
And then from a practical perspective, how do you open up the conversation on managing stress and burnout? One of the things that I do when I speak is I ask the room, how many of us have ever felt burned out before? Everybody raises their hand. And then the next question I ask is, how do you define burnout? And almost no one raises their hand. Exhaustion, we know, is part of the continuum of burnout. The cynicism, the depersonalization, as we move along the continuum. And I have personally found that raising the awareness around defining burnout, or at least elements associated with it, helps create clarity around where on the spectrum you fall in terms of how burned out you are.
That's interesting.
And so from my perspective, my contribution to the well-being space has been around the foundation, raising the awareness, opening up the conversation.
Yeah, my approach is super different. Maybe I'll steal that though. Is that okay?
Hey man, I don't think there's a higher compliment at this point.
I guess it's not really stealing if I ask, but thank you. But what I tend to do a lot of the time in our programs, I tend to sort of at the beginning, I used to do more like, hey, let's talk about your emotional experiences. Let's talk about times that you felt stressed. And then more recently, I've been defaulting to just like you all know how hard it is. Let's get into what we can do about it. Maybe I don't know. I need to think about that. I've actually been doing less table setting at the beginning. Like we have a program now. We have a program called Attentional Self-Defense, how to protect your focus in a world that wants to steal it. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I really love this program. And initially I had a whole thing at the beginning about like, hey, here's why compulsive scrolling, being addicted to content like this, here's why it's so bad for you. And I listed it out. The pleasure of it fades quickly and is replaced by a sort of emotional numbness. It impacts your sleep, creates anxiety. Comparing your life to other people's curated highlight reels is going to create loneliness and frustration and even body dysmorphia. I go through all these things. And then in the final draft, I cut all of that. And instead, I'm just like, I start the program by saying, hey, who here feels that their focus is worse than it was 5 years ago? Will anyone not raise their hand to that? And then instead of listing the stuff, I'm basically just like, look, you all know why this is, right? Let's not waste time on it. Let's talk about what we can do about it. And then I get right into solutions. So I've almost eased up on problem restatement because we all just have it gnawing at our guts all the time. So it's like, you all know, we're starting from there. That's table stakes.
So let's get into what we can do about it.
Which aspect?
I think a solid place to start, at least for the audience on this podcast,
yes,
would be around, I'm stressed. What do I do? I'm thinking about everything going on in my life. Things are tough at home. Things are tough at work. All I want to do is get home, sit on the couch, and look at my phone, look at the TV, and then get up and do it all over again.
Here's a framework that we use. So the first thing is, I'm always partial to getting a meditation practice together. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I love meditation. So you should consider meditating. And you can start small, small, small. Consistency is more important than duration. So I say this to the folks I work with. I would rather you meditate for 2 minutes a day, every day, than 2 hours a day, 4 days a week. Even though that would be much more meditation in the aggregate. It doesn't matter. Consistency, more important than duration. So this doesn't have to eat your life. 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. I don't care. Any amount over 0 is a massive win. So that's one thing. But then something that's like maybe a little more holistic, one thing that we teach is we talk about high impact habits. Habits that have, that require not a ton of input and that have a huge ROI. Right? So the folks who feel overwhelmed, this is stuff that you can approach. It doesn't feel intimidating. And we talk about it in terms of the 5 classical elements. So you're talking about Stoicism in ancient Greece. So they use these 5 elements in ancient Greece. Hindu and Buddhist traditions use these 5 elements. And when I was working out these 5 high impact habits with my team, we found that they happen to map perfectly to the 5 classical elements, which was just a nice coincidence, and it lets us frame our programming in a nice way. So they are fire, earth, air, water, and space, the lesser known 5th element. And so here's one easy place to start. Incorporate the 5 elements of habits. Fire is getting morning sunlight. That's the sort of Andrew Huberman classic, right? Get sunlight, it's got to be outside. Don't do it through a window, right? Don't wear sunglasses in the morning. Take in that morning sun. It does a bunch of good things for your body and your mind, right? Earth is ground yourself through movement. Get it? Earth, ground.
Yeah, I got you.
And so that could be a bunch of things for different people, whether it's yoga or running or jogging or lifting or Tai Chi or whatever it might be. Moving your body has all these benefits, massive benefits, right? If you were to do only one thing, if you were to add one habit, I would say get in a movement habit. Even above meditation.
We're aligned there.
Even above meditation. Air is to center yourself through breathing. Breathing is the only autonomic function that we can also consciously control, which lets us get a toehold into our body's autonomic nervous system. It lets us downregulate our nervous system intentionally by working with the breath. And then water is hydration, often neglected. People understand it in theory, but they often don't understand, well, how much am I supposed to have for my body weight or whatever. And so we give some rules of thumb around that. What am I missing? That was the 4. And then space is content-free time. Time that you spend where you're not listening to anything, reading, or watching anything. Eat a meal and just eat it. Don't be reading or listening to something, right? On the subway, go one stop without putting your earbuds in or taking out your phone. Just finding places for a little bit of content-free space. There are these teachers that I like, these Buddhist teachers called the Aro Lamas, A-R-O, and they talk about washing your hands in emptiness, which I think is a very evocative metaphor. Once in a while, we need to wash our hands in emptiness. So those 5 things, you don't need to do all 5 of them, but because each of them itself alone is a high impact habit. But if you do any one of those, you'll start noticing a difference. Do one of those for a couple of weeks. Once you feel like you have it locked in, you can consider adding another one. But that would be, I think, a good starting place, those 5 habits. Oh, there's a secret 6th habit, actually. I brought this in because I was like, well, I want to include this, but it's not one of the 5 elements. And then I realized, but when I was a kid, I watched Captain Planet. Do you remember Captain Planet?
Yeah, of course.
So you remember how in Captain Planet, the 90s kids cartoon, for anyone who didn't see it, Captain Planet had the power of the 5 elements, right? And they were, in that show, they were fire, air, earth, water, and heart. Now, heart is not one of the elements. It is only in Captain Planet that I've ever seen it referred to as one of the elements, but I was like, good enough for me. It's good enough for Captain Planet. It's good enough for me. So I incorporated heart as well. And that's cultivating some sort of positive emotion. That could be doing a little bit of gratitude practice, really powerful. Could be generosity, engaging in giving in some form. You know, there's a lot of research showing that giving, whether you're giving money or time or effort or items, it's associated with better physical health and even a longer lifespan, as well as mental health aspects as well. And then the other aspects. So you got gratitude, you got generosity, and you've got goodwill, or just an attitude of kindness and well-wishing toward others. So that's the 6th element, is just trying to cultivate some of those positive emotions. And then there are techniques for cultivating those, which we could go into if we had more time.
I love that frame, because I think one thing that we also could add to that is you can stack some of these things.
Absolutely.
And
good point.
It shouldn't get lost on anyone. Like, we're not trying to preach the ultimate morning routine, although it does sound like these are things that I do first thing in the morning.
Totally.
Hydration, morning sunlight, movement, like 3 out of 5 right there. Do it outside, 4 out of 5. Do it without distraction, 5 out of 5, you know? Like, that's stacking all those things. And then I love the points that you make about, I encapsulate it and teach about it as service. When you give, it makes room for more to come in. And that has always made my focus of giving, right? Like we were talking about, make it about the audience, make it about who you're helping, and watch what happens, I guess, is the best way for me to kind of share what my experience would be. Like, I have spent so much time in philanthropy, for example, when I didn't know my purpose. And I think I am constantly building and refining my purpose. But when I didn't know what else to do, giving was at the core, because it's less about how you can make money and more about who you can help. And that money comes as a byproduct. And so I found that, to your point, generosity, giving, service, all of these wonderful things as elements. And also what you were talking about with the gratitude practice. I sat down with New York Times bestselling author Jim Murphy. I don't know if you read the book Inner Excellence or heard of it.
No.
And he talks about, I love this sentiment. He talks about how gratitude connects us to beauty. And beauty is associated with creativity, and creativity helps solve problems, right? When you think more creatively, it amplifies your thinking. And for lawyers, as problem solvers, even creatives in general, having that in your back pocket and cultivating that abundance kind of mindset, and seeing what you do have rather than what you don't, right? Glass half full approach, if you will.
Yeah,
I will. That resonated with me deeply, because I always build gratitude into my life. I try to always say like 3 to 10 things I'm grateful for before I even look at my phone.
Very healthy.
Just to orient my mind and like get the right chemicals going, you know? Because sometimes I wake up and it's dark outside, so I can't get dead sunlight. And I'm sure you
can get a sad lamp.
There's,
You get a sad lamp.
I'll go on Amazon after you show me
go
which
get
one
the,
to get.
the Carex is the one that I like. Carex.
Okay, cool.
It's got to be 10,000 lux though, at least,
Okay.
for it to do any good. Two things I want to say in response to that. In response to what you just said, there's a lot of richness there to pick up on. One is I absolutely agree about the stacking. And so we do a workshop, when we work with law firms, called High Impact Habits, that's specifically about teaching this framework. And at the end, I teach what I call my Uber habit. And it's a stack, right? It's like, it's not saying you have to do this, but it's like a multivitamin. If you do this one thing, you at least know that you're set for the day, that you've done the habits, right? Like a multivitamin is almost like a backup or a safety net, right? You want to get your vitamins through your food, but if you miss something, hey, you took the multivitamin. So like the Uber habit is like that. And it's like, what do I do? I take a walk around the block, that's moving your body. In the morning, that's morning sun. I bring my water bottle, that's hydration. I don't bring my phone or my AirPods, that's content-free time. And then whenever I pass someone on the street, stranger, whoever, in my mind, I say for that person, may you be happy. That's cultivating positive emotions. Wow. Did I miss something? Oh yeah. And I do my breath practice as I walk. That's air. So like as I'm walking around, I'm just focusing on my breathing, drink my water every now and then, get through that bottle. And then when I see someone on the street, in my mind, may you be happy. So that's my like mega habit, the Uber habit that covers all of them, the multivitamin. But then the other thing I wanted to say is I so completely agree about the positive emotion stuff, the gratitude, the generosity, about that being good not just for the people you encounter, but good for you, right? It is, I think, paradoxical, or not paradoxical, it's just interesting that one of the most powerful forms of self-care is caring for other people.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think the Dalai Lama actually says this better than I've ever heard it said. He says, if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish. Care for others. And I think that's very well put.
Maybe one more actionable strategy that people can leverage to help them either cultivate mindfulness or work on their well-being.
Okay, I'll give you two things. I'll give you one thing that's more physical and one thing that's more meditative. So the physical thing is just some simple breath work, all right? Just do two things. You already know this, I'm sure. I'm speaking to your audience, not to you, but I'm going to look at you while I say it. So two things. If you just breathe from the belly instead of from the chest and slow your breathing down to about 6 breaths per minute or slower, if you just do those two things, that is going to stimulate a cranial nerve called the vagus nerve and trigger a physiological relaxation response. That's a way of reaching directly into your nervous system and down-regulating it. It will calm the body, it will calm the mind, and it will do so fairly quickly. So there's an easy one, all right? Just slow your breathing, 6 breaths per minute or slower. You don't have to like look at a stopwatch or whatever, but that's roughly 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out will get you there. And breathe from the belly, not the chest. So there's one. Second one is, this is, I think, one of the simplest, purest, and most powerful forms of meditation. But in some ways, its simplicity can make it a little slippery, a little tricky. The question is, so just ask yourself periodically, get in the habit of asking yourself, am I hooked by anything? Am I hooked by anything? In other words, am I caught up in a thought? Where instead of the thought's there and I know that there's a thought happening, I'm in the thought, right? Wrapped up in the thought, engulfed in the thought. And if you notice that you're hooked, just drop it. That's it. Just drop it. Unhook, right? And then you don't have to do anything else after that. You don't have to bring your attention back to your breath. You don't have to repeat a mantra. There's nothing to stabilize onto. All you do is just let go of the hooks. You notice you're hooked, unhook. You notice you're hooked, unhook. That's it. That is, you'll find practices connected to that in Japanese Zen. You'll find practices connected to that in the Dzogchen tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. It is a deep, deep practice, and it is deceptive in its simplicity. But it's something that you can do sitting on a cushion with your eyes open or closed. And more importantly, it's a thing that you can do as you just toddle about living your life.
It reminds me of two things. One, that the breath is the physiological lever, if you will, to the nervous
it's well
system. Put. And then the second thing that reminds me about hooked or unhooked is this idea of wearing a situation, like physically wearing it. Yeah. And that has always, or since I learned about that sentiment, it's helped me reflect on when I am wearing and raise awareness around when I am wearing a situation or hooked on a thought and learning how to let go. And that skill of letting go, it sounds like a lot simpler than it actually is. It's something that I've had to practice by, like, for example, putting a thought in a balloon, tying it up, and then having the rope around it, cutting the rope, letting the balloon flow up to the sky. And that has been a practice that I've implemented, or a thought sequence that I've implemented to help me learn how to let go of things.
I do think it is simple, but it is not easy.
No, not easy.
It's not easy. And the fact that it's simple is part of what makes it hard, because our brains crave complexity. And in the absence of complexity, we feel like there's something wrong, right? And so this act of unhooking is an act of inclining away from complexity towards simplicity. And the mind has to learn that, because we fear simplicity in some ways. There's something comforting about having all these reference points, these conceptual reference points by which we can triangulate who we are, what we're doing, are we doing it right? And the more you let go of that stuff, the more you're just in a place of, and that can be scary. In Zen, they call that don't know mind. Don't know mind. But yeah, so this little hook, it's like there's a big difference between being in a thought and being with a thought, right? And unhooking, all you're doing is stepping out of the thought so that you're just with it instead of in it, right? And it feels different. Everyone knows the difference between being wrapped up in a story, a mental story, and just knowing that it's going on, but it being something that's kind of going on over there, right? Instead of being engulfed in it like a storm all around you. And so it's just when you notice you're hooked, unhook. Another way to think about it is, if you don't like the hook metaphor, because different metaphors land for different people, here's an alternative. Have you gotten involved in something? Have you gotten involved in a thought? Have you gotten involved in an emotion? This also comes from the Arrow Lamas, by the way, who I mentioned at another point. All you do is let go of your involvement and then remain uninvolved until you notice you've gotten involved in something else. Then let go of your involvement and remain uninvolved for a while. That's really it.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of that one, man.
I hope so.
John, I've had an awesome time here today.
Yeah,
this has been great to sit down. I've learned from you. I admire your work. I appreciate your contribution to the well-being space.
It's mutual.
You're a man on fire in many ways, and lighting the way for guys like me that are navigating this space. So it's cool to get a chance to have this conversation in person. There's a question that I pose to all my guests that I'm not going to pose to you.
Okay.
If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he would say to you?
Be kind and let go. That might even be too complicated.
I know people are going to want to keep up with you. So where can they find you and keep up with your journey?
Website is teamflourish.com. Instagram is at Jon Krop, JONKROP, though I'll warn you, I think I have 6 posts on there. I don't really post on Instagram. Find me on LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn, my name on there is Jon Krop, JONKROP. Easy to find.
My man. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Inside the Inspired. If you got any value out of today's episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Once again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and this is Inside the Inspired.